thank you for coming out. My name is Matt Breach. I'm the CEO of Tallgrass. We're a company that's partnered with Paul Stamets' company to bring these wonderful medicinal mushrooms to Canadians. And we're also bringing Paul Stamets to Canadians this evening. Thank you for joining us for his talk on the subject of mushrooms, mycelium, and the mycology of consciousness. Paul Stamets has published 6 books on the topic of mushrooms and has discovered numerous new unique mushroom species. He is the owner of Fungi Perfecta, maker of host defense mushrooms. And he has won a number of awards, including the Gordon and Tina Watson Mycology Award from the American Mycology Society, as well as the Mycologist of the Year Award from the North American Mycology Association, and the Invention Ambassador Award for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I believe that year that he won that, it was him and the inventor of the digital camera, so he was in good company for that one. For those of you who follow these things, he's also now been immortalized in Star Trek Discovery. That's right, as none other than Lieutenant Paul Stamets, astromycologist. So without further ado, please give Paul Stamets a warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm super honored to be here. I spent a lot of time in Canada in the past few years. I want to first give a shout out and acknowledgement and dedicate my talk to the First Nations. They've been so gracious in allowing us to cohabit this land. And much of my talk centers on ancestral knowledge that is now being verified by current scientific methods. So we have entered into 6X, the 6th greatest extinction event known in the history of life on this planet. But this extinction event is not caused by an asteroid impact. It's caused by an organism, by us. Not only are we the cause of this extinction event, but we're likely to be its victim. Though as severe as that sounds, and the numbers are quite disturbing. There's about 10 million species on this planet. We're losing more than 30,000 species per year. Do the math. In 100 plus years, we'll lose more than 1/3 of the biodiversity that has gotten us here today. So we're at a time critical in the evolution of life on this planet. As severe as those numbers are, I want you to understand that I have great hope. Nature awakens with all sorts of possibilities and solutions that are literally underfoot. So this is something that I want you to sort of clear your minds, clear your receptor sites, open up your hearts, because I'm going to take you on a magical mushroom mystery tour and a very unusual path towards an invention of something that is paradigm shifting, that will literally affect everyone in this room at the very end of my talk. So before I jump into this magical mushroom mystery tour, I'd like to talk about my hat. My hat, I think, makes me look very handsome. In fact, these hats make anyone look very handsome. But this hat was made from an amadou mushroom. An amadou mushroom is a birch polypore called Fomes fomentarius, is Latin binomial. It grows on birch and beech trees primarily in the temporal regions of the world. Now, amadou is a unique mushroom in that it's a fire starter mushroom. You can drill this hollow of this mushroom out, put embers of fire inside, and literally carry fire for days. It was absolutely critical for our ancestors' survival. There is no doubt that we're all from Africa. We migrated north into Europe. We discovered something new called winter. Oops. And if your plant could not keep fire alive, of course, in the wintertime you perish. So this allowed for the portability of fire. And then our ancestors also found that when you boiled this mushroom or soaked it in lye water, it would delaminate into mycelium. And so this hat is actually made by some ladies in Transylvania. There's only about 5 families that are currently making them. There was about 30 or 40 families just 10 years ago. But because of the restriction of habitats, these mushrooms are becoming harder to find. The large ones can make 1 hat. When you get smaller ones, they're hard to piece together. So this mushroom has other unique characteristics. Because it is so flammable, my hat is so flammable. That's why if someone's smoking a cigarette or a joint or on fire, I've actually had a hat catch on fire and simmer for a long time, and then it burst into flames. And so this fire starter mushroom also helped revolutionize warfare. It allowed flint spark guns to work. The Chinese invented gunpowder, but the Europeans invented the flint spark rifle. Of course, in the Napoleonic times, that was extremely important. And there's a massive trade of Amadou mushrooms to support the Napoleon's armies, specifically for that purpose. But this mushroom also has other characteristics that are very interesting. It is the first mushroom that I know of in scientific literature identified to have antiviral properties against the tobacco mosaic virus that causes a curly wilt in all sorts of plants and very, very economically devastating to agriculture in general. But moreover, this also was used by fly fishermen to dry out flies. And so when they would be fly fishing, as you fly fishers know, you have to dry out your fly so you could tap your fly and dry it out. Well, this mushroom also has some other very, very unique properties. And so the biodiversity or the mycodiversity of fungi in our ecosystem has played a pivotal role in the evolution and survival of our species. There's several other species that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about chaga, which also grows on birch and beech trees. I'm going to be talking about the red-belted polypore, that is one of the most common polypores in the world. It's virtually, in most all forests throughout the entire world. And then I have another friend I brought with me, and this one is an especial favorite. This is agaricon, the longest living mushroom in the world, exclusively growing in the old growth forests of Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Now exists only a few sky islands in Europe, and Austria and Slovenia at the border. This mushroom is exclusively growing in old growth forests, and so we lose the forest, then we lose the endemic populations of the species. And I want to present to you that this mushroom will have as much of the importance as Amadou did in helping humans survive and our ancestors. But this mushroom and these other ones that I mentioned are absolutely critical for human survival as we march forward into the future. So, here we go. Let's go get the lights on a little bit. Thank you. I'm not sure what happened there. Let's try that again. Je ne sais pas. Okay, I can do it with my hand here. So the clicker's not working, so I'm going to use this for the AD people. I'm going to march from my computer. So this is a simplified view of the mushroom life cycle. Basically, two spores have to come together and mate. They mate, they fuse together. The mycelium of one spore is mononucleate, has one nucleus per cell. And then when they join together, they can have two nuclei per cell. It's called the dikaryotic. And then after they've mated, then they're fully capable of producing a mushroom, which are fertile offspring. The mushrooms are called fruit bodies. They come from the mycelium. The mushrooms then develop very quickly, typically, not so much for the polypore mushrooms, but the vast majority of fleshy mushrooms that you're familiar with. They grow up and they form and they expand and they mature only in a few days. But the navigation of the mycelium through a hostile microbial environment takes weeks, months, sometimes years to produce a fleshy fruit body that quickly rots. So here's an example of how quickly the mycelium grows over a few days. And the mycelium then when it matures, it forms these mycelial mats. These are some of my scanning electron micrographs. And the arrows point to hypoaggregates, the very beginning of mushroom formation. These are called primordia. The primordia then form, and typically primordia form in response to four environmental stimuli. The introduction of water, we all know that, rain. When you have water and rain, you have evaporation, so you have evaporative cooling, so you have a drop in temperature. So that dropping in temperature is number two. Number three, the mycelium comes to the surface when it rains, exhales carbon dioxide, inhales oxygen. So that's the third one, is the availability of oxygen and being able to exhale carbon dioxide. And the fourth one is quite surprising, and I'll be talking about this as light. Most mushrooms require light. The button mushrooms you see in the store, they're grown in the dark. But the vast majority of mushrooms are photosensitive and phototropic, and the bandwidth of light is absolutely critical for their maturation. Very quickly, a primordium will form, and then it bursts out of the mother mycelium. It fully matures, releases spores, and they can go from this stage to this stage in a week. And this is an over-mature mushroom in the genus Russula, and now it is past its prime, and the mushrooms give themselves up. Essential key concept here is that mushrooms don't have a good immune system, but the mycelium does. The mycelium is surrounded by hostile microorganisms. It's only one cell wall thick. Mushrooms are hundreds, if not thousands, of cell walls thick. But it matures, it ripens, it's called a fruit body, much like a peach attracts herbivores, people, animals, etc. It ripens, and so it's nutritious. And then by eating the peach pit is spread, and then the peach pit can germinate, and a new tree will form. So fruit bodies typically, both plants and animals, beckon and attract animals in order to spread them. They tend to be highly perishable. So the mycelium then, as the mushroom begins to rot, spores germinate from the gills, lots of other organisms co-occur, and the mycelium then goes underground. In 1 cubic inch of soil that's fully myceliated, it can be between 1 and 8 miles of mycelium if you stretch those mycelium end upon end. My foot is covering approximately 300 miles of mycelium. And the mycelium is not only like an externalized lungs, exhaling carbon dioxide and inhaling oxygen, but they're an externalized digestive membranes. And there's no site-specific place or stomach in a mushroom mycelium. The entire membrane is releasing enzymes, acids, all sorts of other chemicals, and then breaking down the nutrients in a form that the mycelium can absorb those nutrients and these directly through its cell walls. So these are externalized lungs, they're externalized stomachs. And the mycelium is wonderfully articulated to withstand catastrophe. If there is an impact of disturbing the mycelium, from whatever type of disturbance, the mycelium oftentimes works in response whenever it grows and replenishes. So there's always alternative pathways for channeling nuclei and nutrients should any strand of the mycelial mat be interrupted or broken. A good friend of mine, Patrick Hickey, I came up with this little movie here. He calls these comet nuclei. This is over about 3 or 4 hours, and these are hundreds of nuclei streaming through the mycelial network. Now, when we had still photography, looking under the microscope, we couldn't see this. But what's amazing is that the mycelium channels these nuclei that become polynucleate at the tips. I mentioned before, there's 2 nuclei per cell, but at the tips they become polynucleate. And so in the breadth of my hands, about a meter to 2 meters across, there can literally be trillions of end branches. And at the tips of the polynucleate, there's multiple nuclei, and then these nuclei, if they reassort genetic material, they encounter a new food source, an insect, a new toxic chemical, if it rearranges and expresses in epigenesis a new enzyme or acid that can capture and break down that potential food source and absorb it, what happens? The mycelium surges, because now it's been encoded for a new digestive system for being able to capture that nutrition. So I'm going to wax poetic, but I firmly believe this. The mycelium conforms to an archetype that I believe in the course of evolution, nature builds upon the previous evolutionary successes. The mycelium forms networks, not dissimilar to that of neurons. Looking at the computer internet, the reason why it's so resilient is there's so many nodes and crossings, it also conforms to the same archetype. And I present to you that directly after the Big Bang, 14 billion years ago, the organization then of matter also conforms to string theory and develops some of these same networks. This is 1 parsec, about 3.26 light years in diameter, at the highest magnification, and we're pulling back now. and we again see the same archetype shared by mycelium, by neurons, by the computer internet, and the vastness of the universe. And then looking at the organization of dark matter, these are the ellipses or galaxies. From the Hubble telescope at deep field view, there's over 100,000 galaxies depicted in this one view. But the organization of dark matter also conforms to that of the same archetype shared by mycelium, by the computer internet, by our neurons, and the organization of matter in the universe. So when the universe formed about 14 billion years ago, then stardust began to coalesce. And then the Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago. But when the Earth formed, only 20 to 40 million years would have formed 4.5 billion years ago, an amazing celestial event occurred. The planet Theia came crashing into the Earth. It was smaller than Mars. It jettisoned enormous amounts of debris in the gravitational field of the Earth, and the moon then coalesced from that impact. This is why when the lunar astronauts went to the moon and came back, the radioactive isotopes were identical to that of the Earth. So then looking at the fossil record, 2.4 billion years ago in South Africa, the first evidence of a multicellular organism was discovered this past year. 2.4 billion years ago. Now, we split from fungi 600 million years ago. There's a new super kingdom called the Pleistocanta. The Pleistocanta joins Animalia and fungi together. 600 million years ago, we split from fungi. And fungi went to choose this filamentous route of the web-like mycelium. We chose the route of encapsulating our nutrients in a cellular sac, basically a stomach, and then secreting juices, gastric juices, in order to break down that food in order to absorb it. But think of that, 600 million years ago, we split from fungi. Well, 1.8 billion years later, animals begin to emerge. This means that we are descended from fungi. Our filamentous ancestors were fungi. We are the children of fungi. So let's move forward into 420 to 360 million years ago, a giant organism dotted the landscapes of Earth. At the time that vascular plants and trees and woody shrubs had not yet evolved, ferns existed, but the tallest plants on Earth were less than 3 feet tall. This fossil was discovered. It's over 10 meters in length. It is called Prototaxides. Well, Prototaxides to 10 meters in length with an enormous fungus. And Dr. Kevin Boyce and Francis Hoover were able to determine that Prototaxides that was first discovered in 1859, fossil records in Quebec and elsewhere in Australia, that dotting across the face of the Earth were these giant fungi. 10 meters, 35 feet, 40 feet tall. The tallest organisms on Earth at the time, when the electromagnetic fields were extremely active, lots of lightning strikes, so to attract lightning and zap these Prototaxides, a perfect environment for epigenesis, for stimulation of evolution. So we advanced from 420 million years ago, and we had a giant disaster. 250 million years ago, we had an asteroid impact. Out of the celestial heavens hurled this asteroid that zoomed down into the Earth and had an impact that caused a great extinction at the Permian-Triassic boundary, resulting in more than 90% of the organisms, or plants and animals, to become extinct. The Earth became shrouded in dust, sunlight was cut off, and fungi inherited the Earth. And so, in the post-Permian-Triassic extinction event, the BT boundary, we have a very good evidence of a fossil record of exactly this extinction event. So we also, in the fossil record, we've been able to find fossils of a fungus called Reduviosporinides. This dominates the fossil record as the fungus group that gobbled up the wood debris from the forest being destroyed. And we advance forward to the time of Gondwana, continental drift begins, to the formation of the continents as we know today. And through the continental drift, then we had species proliferating, because when you have isolation of land masses, then you have differentiation in the species biodiversity. We then go forward to 110 million years ago, and this was also discovered this past year in Brazil, Gondwana agaricides. 110 million years ago, we had found a fossil, the scientists found a fossilized mushroom, complete with its stems and gills. Now think about it, 110 million years ago, the dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. These are ancient organisms. Mushrooms had their form long before we had ours. Think about it, the implications. Then we go forward again, and we have another celestial visitor, 65 million years ago. Another asteroid impact comes out of the heavens and packs the Earth. A massive catastrophe, enormous amounts of debris, again, jettisoned into the atmosphere. The Earth is shrouded by dust, sunlight is cut off, plants and animals die, and fungi re-inherit the Earth. The implications here, I think, are profound. Those organisms that paired with fungi tend to survive. We are now facing 6X. It is time for us to learn the lessons of evolution and realize for us to survive extinction events, pairing and partnering with fungi is extremely important. So our current ecosystem as it looks today, the current continents, and so then animals then flourished, and then our primates began to evolve. And I was really fascinated in looking at how many primates consume mushrooms. And so this Australian research group published this paper. The goldie monkey from Brazil consumes more than 12 times its body weight per year in fungi and mushrooms. Americans consume about 2 kilograms per year, less than 3% of our body weight. So primates, and in particular 22 primates, are known to identify and consume mushrooms. Know the difference between edible and poisonous ones. Well, 23 when you add humans. So this speaks to a very deep ancestry of the knowledge and the wisdom of knowing which mushrooms are good and safe to consume. Now there's a term called mycophobia, the irrational or rational fear of fungi. Well, think of it. In your visual landscape, you see plants and animals for months, years. You have a familiarity factor because you have constant contact. Well, mushrooms pop up and disappear in a few days. Some mushrooms can feed you, some can heal you, some can kill you, some can send you on a spiritual journey. For something so powerful and yet so ephemeral, it is natural for humans to avoid that. So the cognoscenti of indigenous peoples held this sacred knowledge and was able to pass it down through the generations until we know which mushrooms are edible and poisonous today. How do we know which ones are edible or poisonous? We know from the prior experiences of people who have eaten them before us. And so this is the body intellect that our cultures have passed on. But something phenomenal happened in the primate evolution. About 2 million years ago, our ancestors' brain suddenly enlarged by more than a factor of 2. Homo sapiens appeared about 200,000 years ago. And what caused the sudden doubling of the primate brain, especially in the prefrontal cortex? Now, there was also coincident a massive amount of climate change. Homo erectus became extinct about 75,000 years ago. Homo sapiens, marched into Europe. Homo erectus was there as well. Neanderthals became extinct within 4,000 years of contact in Europe. So, and most all of us have Neanderthal genes in this. I did 23andMe, I'm 2.9% Neanderthal. Kind of look that way too. So this sudden advantage that Homo sapiens had over Homo erectus and Neanderthals is a mystery that cannot be fully explained. But there is a theory, I say a hypothesis. Now what I'm going to present to you is an unprovable hypothesis. But I want for you just to ask yourself to suspend your disbelief on what I'm going to present and look at it from a circumstantial point of view and what evidence that we have. And this speaks to the stone ape theory. Now, it's actually a hypothesis. Our primate ancestors, as postulated by Terence and Dennis McKenna, came out of the savannas, they're walking across the landscape. What do when you track animals? You look for tracks and you look for scat. The most bodacious mushroom growing in the tropics is Psilocybe cubensis, the magic mushroom. Our primate ancestors consumed these mushrooms and the heavens opened up. You suddenly saw, and you shared it with your family, with your plants. It was a group experience. Neurogenesis occurred. New synapses, new neurons, new connections. The ability to conceive, to be able to invent new weapons, to be able to strategize. This is what Terence McKenna described as a stone ape theory that I propose to you. It's not a theory, it's a hypothesis. Psilocybin degrades the psilocin, which I binds to, with activates serotonin receptors, stimulating neurogenesis, improving visual acuity, and as also being able to hear better. The reason why it's not a theory is a hypothesis of an educated guess to explain an observable phenomenon. The theory is a hypothesis that can be tested by science and factual support. We don't have enough time to go over hundreds of thousands of years to be able to see if this is true. But interestingly, there is increased evidence that speaks to neurogenesis. So the Sicily rock art of northern Algeria, the first image that I'll show you is the actual pictograph. 7,000 years ago. It's been recolorized by a friend of mine, Jonathan Meter, so you can see it. This is the bee-man. Now, it's known well in Mesoamerica and still to this day to best preserve magic mushrooms. You can put them in honey. Well, I suggest that this has led to the formation of psychoactive meads. And there was the Bavarian Beer Purity Act of 1516 that banned specifically mushrooms by name from being put into beer, as well as henbane and a bunch of other plants. Now, I think there's a struggle between monotheism and polytheism, between Christianity and pagan people celebrating nature and life in the forest. But the church and the institutions wanted to institutionalize and tax the ability of citizens to alter their consciousness. So I think this is very probable that the psychoactive meads of Europe were specifically imbued with these magic mushrooms. And that knowledge is not only European, but also in the Mesoamericans. So Psilocybe sublanciata is a very common mushroom here around Vancouver. And Artgord, Boston, Maria Sabina, 1955. And Demeter is giving Persephone a mushroom, and upon consuming the mushroom, in Greek culture, Persephone then goes into a deep sleep. She goes into the underworld, and Greek mythology has the advent of winter. Well, Life magazine distributed millions of these magazines from the middle of the Cold War, published in 1957, to the doorsteps of Americans, and reporting on Artgord, Boston, and Valentina's experience in seeking the magic mushroom. And there was actually a good field guide that showed taxonomically correct specimens. This caused an enormous amount of Americans and Canadians and Europeans to go to Mexico to look for the quote-unquote magic mushroom. Well, the use of mushrooms in Mesoamerica, it goes back thousands of years. These are mushroom stones. They are specifically identified as symbols of idolatry by the Catholic Church. And so when the Spanish conquistadors came over, in order to suppress native indigenous religions, they would smash these by the thousands. Because the Europeans came with their great ships, they brought also disease, they had iron, they had metal weapons, they had superior warfare technology. Because the shamans of that time had no experience with smallpox. With tuberculosis is debatable, it could have been there before. But many of these diseases the Europeans came on, the native people did not have time to adapt, to look for native remedies. Massive dialogue by millions and millions of Mesoamericans through the European diseases. I am the temporary, my wife and I are the temporary custodians of 17 of these mushroom stones. I've collected them over all the years of my life. I want to pass them back to the indigenous peoples at the right time. But several indigenous peoples from Guatemala and other people associated with the Guatemalan government have told me don't return them to the Guatemalan government. They'll be sold off on the black market. There's no institution down there that can hold these mushroom stones, in their proper regard. And 2 shamans have told me, Paul, they're safer with you. You hold on to them until the time is right. Some of these are extraordinarily interesting. Now, much of my work was sponsored by these 4 individuals who were absolutely critical in my life. Dr. Michael Hughes, holding the two baskets there. He's a professor at the Evergreen State College. Dr. Alexander Smith, to the right, he's from the University of Michigan. Dr. Daniel Stuntz, to the lower left, from the University of Washington, and Kit Skates from Post Falls, Idaho. These people are extraordinarily important in my life. And in the 1970s, when I appeared at the Evergreen State College, I had been self-taught mushroom identification. I'm living up in the Cascades as a logger hippie living in the woods, and living by myself. And I was coming down the University of Washington Library, looking up literature on psilocybin mushrooms. And I met these giants in the field of mycology. Now, these people were somewhat conservative politically, so it was really nice and generous of them to take me under their wing, because when I was 19 years old, this is what I looked like. So your suspicions are now confirmed. So I had a passionate interest in taxonomy and mushroom identification. That's one of my skill sets. And my brother John was my mentor. My brother John went to Yale. John went to the University of Washington on a full scholarship in neurophysiology. So I'm the youngest one in my family. My brother John was 5, 6 years older than me. So I was always trying to impress my brother. My brother John went to Mexico and Colombia, came back with crazy, wonderful stories about tripping on magic mushrooms, and I was super eager to hear about it. And so I was always trying to impress my brother. Well, I received the AAAS Award as an Invention Ambassador, the most prestigious scientific organization in the world. And I received the award, and I got really excited because I was trying to impress my brother that my research is legit. John, it really is. Your younger brother's doing some real good research. But, older brother, younger brother dynamics. So I called my brother up when I got the award on a Friday, and he didn't answer his phone. And I was so excited to tell my brother that the most prestigious scientific organization in the world authenticated my work. And he didn't answer the phone because he had died that day. So John never got the message, and so my brother John I have a dear love for, because John first got me excited about mushrooms. Well, John got me excited about mushrooms, really, when he came back from Yale University with this book called Altered States of Consciousness by Charles Turner. Now, we grew up in a small town called Columbiana, Ohio, and we had a fairly large house, but we had a fully equipped laboratory in the basement. I thought all houses had laboratories in the basement. I go to my friend's house and go, "Where's your laboratory?" But they had a fully equipped laboratory, 3 rows of shelves, and we had the radio from the aircraft carrier, the Intrepid. My dad served on it in World War II. So after World War II, he brought the radio from the aircraft carrier we had in the basement. I could play with the radio, but my brother John would not let me play with any of the chemicals because I would blow up things. So John brought back this book, and I said, "John, I'm really interested. Can I borrow this book?" And he goes, "Sure, but I need it back in a week because I'm going back to Yale." I said, "Okay, John." So I borrowed the book. My friend Ryan Snyder was my best friend. Ryan saw me real excited about this book, and I went through it. Ryan said, "Well, can I borrow your brother John's book?" I go, "Yes, but he needs it back." So Ryan borrows my brother John's book, and a few days passed, a few more days passed. I go, "Ryan, I need my book back. Hurry, my brother John needs it." And my brother John asking me, "Oh, where's the book? I didn't get back to my class." And Ryan kept on hemming and hawing. I go, "Ryan, I need my book back." And then finally I confronted Ryan. I was really upset. I go, "Ryan, where is my brother John's book?" And Ryan sheepishly looked down and said, "Paul, I can't give it back to you." I said, "Why?" He says, "My father found it and burned it." I went, "Whoa." I said, So today, I have a debt of gratitude to Ryan Snyder's father, because he actually inspired me on my path. Because I thought this book was so powerful, it made him want to burn it. And this is a subject I definitely want to look into. So, psilocybin cubensis co-inhabits other magic mushrooms. It grows on elephant dung, hippopotamus, zebra, horse, buffalo. And I went on to the Arizona State College. We received a Drug Enforcement Administration license. I've published 4 new species of genus psilocybin, all psilocybin active. And there was a huge interest in psilocybin mushrooms in the 70s and early 80s, and it sort of waned. And there was, massive people collecting them, and then it sort of faded from popularity to a large degree. And then it was sort of rediscovered by medical researchers, in particular at Johns Hopkins Medical School, and now New York University, UCLA. And there's about a half dozen now clinical studies on psilocybin as a medicine therapeutically to deal with people at the end of life experiences who have significantly positive experiences even 14 months later. What's interesting is the majority of people had positive experiences clinically under the supervision of physicians at Johns Hopkins. And 14 months later, they interviewed their friends, their wives, their husbands, and their children, other people close. They said, this person has dramatically improved in their attitude, they're easier to get along with, they've had positive effects. The few people who had negative effects, the negative effects did not last longer than the experience itself. So there's no residual negative impression subsequent to the fact that I don't want to do this again. So that's very interesting. So this study came out this past year. This is amazing to me. 480,000 people surveyed by DSHS. And psilocybin use one time in their life, statistically significant, associated with a 27% decreased odds of past year larceny, theft, 22% decreased odds of property crime, 18% odds of violent crime. This is an association, is not necessarily causation, but it can be. This study just came out this past 2 months. There's an increased nature relatedness and a decreased attraction to authoritarian political views after use of psilocybin. I can think of one president who really needs this. Can't you? So, again, this is really extraordinary that these people, from experiences for one time with psilocybin, have such a dramatically positive impact. Well, now we know that psilocybin activates the hippocampus, causing neurogenesis, the extinction of the fear response. So with PTSD, rape victims, people experiencing trauma, this is something that has gotten physicians and psychotherapists very excited. The FDA in the United States is looking at rescheduling psilocybin from a Schedule 1 drug, which means it has no medical benefit or use, into a Schedule 2. 14 FDA officials and scientists met with a group of other researchers that have been studying psilocybin, and they think this would be good for PTSD for soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and the FDA said no. PTSD affects so many people in car accidents, sexual trauma. So many people have PTSD, and they never found anything, they said. The FDA said, have never seen anything that clinically is most significant from one-time experience with such low toxicity and a long history of proven use of safety. So this is something that's really exciting, and I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more research on the use of psilocybin as a therapeutic drug. Now, because psilocybin extinguishes the fear conditioning response, now think about that. Our ancestors going through the wilderness encounters a saber-toothed tiger, disastrous event, people were harmed and hurt. You're the leader of your clan. You trip on these mushrooms, you're able to overcome your fear response and conditioning. And the next time you encounter a saber-toothed tiger then retreating, you can survive. Well, this means that psilocybin induces courage and kindness. Empathy to one of your fellow tribespeople, courage to overcome the fear response that's been conditioned. Well, in fact, these are leadership skills. And we know from the DSHS study, you become a better citizen. So the clinical studies at Johns Hopkins University, the first studies now, and there's about a half a dozen other studies now that show that psilocybin-assisted therapy is a novel treatment for psychiatric disorders that are otherwise not responsive to other conventional medicines. There is a reset therapeutic mechanism that is now been shown that you can change your mind, literally, from one of these experiences. The amygdala response to faced psilocybin, you have a different response to facial recognition, to people who may have harmed you. And this is an extraordinary slide. On the left, this is your brain without psilocybin. On the right, this is your brain with psilocybin. Which brain do you want, you know? So what's now become very popular is microdosing in Silicon Valley. And microdosing is basically taking a low sub-threshold dose of psilocybin where you will not feel an effect. Now, this is extremely popular in Silicon Valley right now for coders, for people writing complex software, and they're using it. And it's very interesting in talking to people, very straight people who never consider using a drug. But when they think about the ability of creating neurogenesis, having greater creativity, greater intellectual acumen, being able to prevent dementia, the idea of taking a sub-threshold dose, like a vitamin, to be able to increase their cognitive abilities is extremely appealing. So I call this epigenetic neurogenesis. And so this has been written up in the Wall Street Journal. Many of you know about this. Many people here in this audience are actually participating in this. So now psilocybin mushrooms may be the first smart mushroom, but lion's mane is also a mushroom of extraordinarily great interest right now. The advantage of lion's mane is obvious that they're legal. There's a long history of use. Lion's mane mushrooms contain novel compounds called arenacenes and hericenones. These are nerve growth factors that cause a remyelination on the axons of nerves. The myelin is an electrical conductive layer on the axons through which the nerve signals travel. And in Alzheimer's and dementia, when you have neuropathies, oftentimes there's demyelination. That sheath that's conductive that is interrupted, and oftentimes amyloid plaques are formed. And the amyloid plaques interfere with neurotransmission. Well, there's been 2 clinical studies in Japan specifically showing that lion's mane mushrooms improve significantly mild cognitive impairment in double-blind placebo-controlled studies. And they showed an increased ability for cognition. And interestingly, they were using about 3 grams of lion's mane per day. But statistically significant, when they stopped using lion's mane in these elderly patients, then the dementia-like symptoms return. So lion's mane mushrooms contain these compounds, but an extraordinary interesting to me is when we did analyses for the arenacenes between different species or different strains, we got very different results. Now, lion's mane mushrooms have these compounds called arenacenes, named after Hericium arenaceus. But lion's mane was discovered to have these neurogenic properties because of a researcher named Kawagishi in Japan. And he published a patent in 1994 specifically suggesting that lion's mane could be a preventative to Alzheimer's, very good for MS victims, to address many forms of neuropathies. How he discovered this is extraordinary. He looked at bird's nest fungi, and he looked for antibacterial agents from bird nest fungi, the little cup fungi with little flying saucers in it, that everybody probably has seen. And he found that there were cyanophane derivatives named after the genus Cyapus, the bird's nest fungus. And then when they did batch fermentation of the lion's mane mycelium in pure cultures, like they do with many pharmaceutical drugs, when they analyzed the mycelium, it had none of these arenacenes. It turns out that when the fermentation stopped, and the mycelium all belonged together, then the immunity of the mycelium declined to mature, and then a bacterium would come in, Bacillus megaterium. And because of the contact of the bacterium with the mycelial mat, because of epigenesis, an immune response was created, creating the arenacenes. So it meant that pure culture of lion's mane mushrooms was not the best way to grow it. Having these commensal bacteria associated with it elicited the arenacene production. So these mushrooms also these compounds are also found in bear's head, Bristocate biatis. I think most of you have seen it. It's one of the safest mushrooms in the world to identify. There's nothing that looks like it. It's poisonous. So a group of researchers then did some research with lion's mane mushrooms in the genus Hericium with mice. And these studies are particularly fascinating to me. They had these mice and they inject them with a toxic polypeptide that induces Alzheimer-like symptoms, induces the amyloid plaques, causes demyelination. And so they put these mice in an arena, and there was a Y test. You go left, you would get food, you go right, you would not. The mice very, very quickly learned to go left. But when they inject them with cytotoxic polypeptide, the mice got confused. They began to randomize. As full-blown dementia and neurodegeneration occurred, they then equally went left and right. They forgot which way to go. When they fed those mice fully diseased, and they sacrificed some, they could see the amyloid plaques forming in the brain. When they fed those mushrooms that were fully diseased, lion's mane mushrooms, 23 days later, they significantly improved their ability to remember which way to go. Another test that'd be more fascinating is a novelty experiment. They put two objects inside an arena with 100 mice, and the mice very, very quickly explored those objects, and they did little counters to see how many points of contact, how many times the mice came and visited those novel objects, and then they injected them with a polypeptide again, and when they put a new object into the arena, they were disinterested. Loss of curiosity, novelty response was not there. And then again, they fed the lion's mane mushrooms, fully diseased neurogenesis. The then mice regained their sense of curiosity and inquisitiveness. Sacrificing the mice, they saw deep the remyelination occur, and the amyloid plaques have been removed. This is phenomenally important. The tragedy of age is we have encyclopedic knowledge with many of the elders who have accumulated this knowledge through their lifetime experiences, and they then begin to lose it. They're not able to pass it down to future generations. This is a mushroom I think all of you should be taking. I personally take it every day. This is something that I think is one of the most profound, examples in the fungal kingdom of a medicinal mushroom. And what is the difference now between a medicinal food and a drug? This is a new category. So, looking at the neurogenesis from psilocybin, looking at neurogenesis from lion's mane mushroom, I want to propose to you a formula. A new nootropic vitamin complex, a stacking formula, combining psilocybin, RNA seeds, and vitamin B3. Now, why vitamin B3? Niacin. Niacin because when you take niacin, you flush red, and the nerves tingle. So my concept here, we can use niacin to drive neurogenesis to the end points. When you have neuropathies, typically at the end of your nerve endings, your toes and your fingers, you have a deadening of the nerves. The idea is to excite and to drive the neurogenic compounds of psilocybin and RNases to the nerve endings so epigenetic neurogenesis can occur. So this is extraordinarily interesting to me. I like this idea of stacking. I'm hoping here in Canada we can design a clinical study to test this. Again, this is at sub-threshold doses. There's no change in consciousness at these levels. At the higher levels, it can be a little bit change in consciousness, but you quickly activate. At the lower levels, there's none at all. So, also, it was discovered that with psilocybin in contact, that there was a pro-environmental change in behavior. Now, this speaks to me very deeply and very personally. Because from my experiences on psilocybin, my heart opens. I feel expansive with the universe. Trees are axis mundi, taking me to the depths of the earth. I feel one with nature. Rocks are alive. Animals are my friends. I have a sense of empathy and oneness with nature. This is informative in my experiences that have led to the discoveries that I'm going to show you. The largest organism in the world is a mycelial map in eastern Oregon, 2,200 acres in size. Is a honey mushroom. It's only one cell wall thick. How is it possible? The largest organism in the world is one cell wall thick. We have 5 or 6 skin layers that protect us from infection by psyllium. It has one, surrounded by hundreds of millions of microbes per gram. Those biologists here know this well. You take a scoop of gram of soil, and you measure how many polyform units there are, how many organisms. 100 million is very common. For all these microbes be surrounded by mycelium one solid wall thick, how is it possible? It can achieve the largest size of any organism in the world. It does so because of that host defense of immunity, and through epigenesis is able to code for resistance to production of antibiotics to stave off those predators. So we are dependent upon these mycelial networks in nature. Unfortunately, because of repetitive devastation and logging and cutting down the forest repeatedly, we are denaturing nature. The soil lenses are becoming thinner, the carrying capacity becomes lower. The rule of nature is when the organism exceeds the carrying capacity of its ecosystem, what happens? Diseases, starvation, hunger, diseases proliferate, in our case wars, water tables are lost. And directly after a forest is cut, 90% of the carbon is coming from bacteria. After 70 years, 75% of the carbon is coming from fungi. These are the predominant reservoirs of carbon for global warming. It is not the soil as much as it is the fungi in the soil. And so you're looking at today, we have only 10 to 15% of the wood debris residents in the forest today. 70% of the soils are composed of microbial mass. 30% of the soil is fungal. It's the predominant reservoir of storing carbon. To offset global warming is to store it in the fungal tissues in the soil. So, I spent a lot of time in the old growth forest. We collect mushrooms in the old growth forest, my wife and I. This is where I like to go to church on Sundays. I got very interested in the antimicrobial properties of mushrooms because I'm a scanning electron microscopist and a microbiologist. And so I'm really interested in the antiviral properties of mushrooms. So I wrote an article for Bubbleman, many of you know it, surveying all the scientific literature for what is out there in scientific literature on the antiviral properties of mushrooms. Well, I surveyed the literature, and there's a whopping one page. There's like 7 articles in the entire scientific literature. And 2 photographs take up about half a page, so it's really about half a page of references. So I published this in June of 2001 in Bubbleman, and then 9/11 occurs in September 11th in 2001. And the Bioshield Biodefense Program was funded by George W. Bush for several $1 billion because the great concern after 9/11 was not only airplanes flying into buildings, but terrorism, especially bioterrorism. Viruses don't care about borders. So you can have custom agents trying to intercept nuclear, radioactive material, but viruses spread by people, by contact, airplanes, trains, auditoriums, whatever. So the BioShield Biodefense physicians saw my article and said, Paul, we're very eager to find novel remedies to protect, global citizens from bioterrorism, especially from anthrax, which is a dumb bioterrorist weapon. Only hurts the people that it makes contact with, or one arm's reach away. But a virus, somebody had smallpox in this room, in a matter of a few hours, a huge number of people would be infected with smallpox. So we started doing some experiments. Now, looking at the scientific literature, most of the experiments were done with fruit bodies, the mushrooms. But I had this keen sense of epigenesis and the organization of mycelium, being able to navigate through hostile environments. And so I started focusing on the mycelium and comparing the mycelial extracts versus the mushrooms that came from the mycelium, and comparing those extracts and challenges against bacterial pathogens and also viruses. This article came out a few years ago. It shows specifically that more genes code when the mycelium is growing than when the mushrooms are growing. There's a lot more genes that are active, and it makes sense. You're trying to defend against all these pathogens and trying to consume it. The mushrooms is fleshy, it's food, deer, people eat it, it rots in a few days. So its immune system doesn't have to be as intact as the long path the mycelium takes to navigate through the microbiome of soils. So there's much more protein-coding genes that are activated in the mycelium than there is in the fruit bodies. So we look at the mycelium aggregates into a baby mushroom. And it turns out that blue light stimulates mushroom formation, specifically the 320 to 400 nanometer range. The absence of this blue light, mushrooms are stunted, and they oftentimes are malformed. So we started working with our culture collection, and we submitted thousands of samples, literally, to the BioShield Biodefense Program. And we had an extraordinary result. And the result that was extraordinary at first, the most extraordinary, was agarikon, the one I held up at the beginning. Fungus officinalis. So we started collecting agarikon strains, and I have been collecting them since the 1980s because it's such a rare mushroom. And one time out of 100 times going into the old growth forest, there are valleys where I can find clusters of them, but literally, my professor, Dr. Michael Yu, has spent 40 years collecting mushrooms. He found his first agarikon in his life 2 years ago. And he goes out many times through the course of a year. He found his first one, so they can be extremely rare. They're quite common in the Gulf Islands, you know, going up in the Inland Passage, much more so than elsewhere because of the old growth forest. So we went out and we went collecting for these, and we went up Desolation Sound, and we found this very, very unusual place where there is a giant agarikon that was growing. But the place that we found this agarikon also had this strange rock. And this rock was strangely shaped like an agarikon. And so, here's agarikon, here's the rock, here's agarikon, here's the rock, here's agarikon. And so we're like, this is very weird. And so we collected specimens from that location, and sometimes we had to go high up into trees, and here is a large agarikon on Cortez Island coming from a dead branch. Interestingly, it does not rot the branch that supports it, as hard as rock. And the agarikon can have two forms. It can have when it's fresh, this is the dark brown color, but then it has the ghost form. It transforms into this whitish fruit body. And it's called the quinine fungus. Now this was the first reported by Dioscorides in 65 AD, the very first Materia Medica. And it was called Elixirium ad long vitam because the elixir of long life. So putatively presented as a treatment against consumption, later to be known as tuberculosis. So when Dr. Scott Grandwell, featured here, saw an article I wrote on agarikon and saw that it was used for treating consumption, he's the director of the tuberculosis research laboratory at the University of Illinois in Chicago. So he contacted me saying, "Paul, I'm a tuberculosis expert, funded by the Gates Foundation. We're real interested in XDR-TB, multi-strain reductive resistant strains of mycobacterial tuberculosis. You know, I'm really interested in working with you." So Scott and I started working together. We started collecting agarikon strains. Now we have 75 strains of agarikon, by far the largest strain library in the world, collected from the United States and Canada, and also some Sky Islands in Europe. Now, I thought those agarikons were large, and so I saw this one. Like, whoa, that is huge. So I have 4 slides that got mixed up here. This is what happens with these new computers. I said touch something. So when we went the Inland Passage of Desolation Sound, I was approached by National Geographic. They wanted to do a story on agarikon. So they wanted to come out in the wintertime. I said, do it so, come in the summertime. So we went up the Inland Passage of Desolation Sound, and they wanted to know how likely is I'd find agarikon. I said, no, 50-50. I just made it up. I said, infinitesimally small, the likelihood we find it, but I didn't want to discourage it. So I took 10 of my friends, and I took them up to Desolation Sound, high-powered binoculars, and we looked for snags. They looked like a big bee's nest. And often where bald eagles were, so we looked for bald eagles and snags and see if we could find agarikon. And so we came to that rock that you saw earlier that was shaped, it looked like it was shaped like agarikon. And so we couldn't find agarikon, and we got really tired, and our skipper said, let's go over to a First Nation site that's sacred. No one really knows what the pictographs mean, but let's go there and have lunch. So it was on East Redonda Island, and we go over there, and we're exhausted, and then one of my teammates said, there's one, we found an agarikon. And this one's unusual because it fell from the branch, teeter-tottered onto another branch, and then it grew 2 legs. The mycelium grew back into the tree, and it was still alive, and it grew 2 legs. So we were ecstatic, the National Geographic writer was ecstatic, you know, we went on our mission, we found a new discovery of agarikon. They did not want to go to a place that we had already been to. And so it led to, well, let me explain about what I know about the indigenous use of agarikon. With a Haida people, Charles Eppenshaw is an argillite plate from 1894, I believe, that speaks of the origination myth of women. And the raven is happening on the Sea of Eternity. There's indigenous people here know this story a lot better than I do, so please forgive me. But Raven is specifically in the quest to find her genitalia as a woman. And no one can help Raven steer on the Sea of Eternity to find her genitalia, except for homeless man in the back of the canoe, this wide-eyed character. And so Agarikon can have these columnar forms. The North Coast First Nations people, these would be carved and put on the graves of shamans to help the shamans navigate into the afterlife. And then a good friend of mine, Gujao, and I think Wise here in the audience, respects. And when I went up to see Gujao and his family, I felt like I was carrying the ancestral knowledge of Agarikon from Greek culture, from the work that I had done to bring it back, this ancestral knowledge. And Gujao, after several days, he goes, you gringos think we know everything. Frankly, we had 2 flu pandemics, 2 smallpox pandemics, each of which wiped out the majority of our people, especially the elders. We had great ancestral knowledge about these fungi at one time, and so much of it has been lost. So I apologize for my slides getting a little bit mixed up here, but there's Scott Franzlau, director of research. This is a pictograph that was on that rock where we found the Agarikon with the 2 legs. So we were able to get these cultures, these mushrooms in the culture, and then we began a very painstaking process of what's called bioguided fractionation. Taking 2 solvents, taking a polar solvent, which is water on the far left, and a non-polar solvent like hexanes. And different solvents will separate out different constituents. So in bioguided fractionation, like with Scott Franzlau, what we did is that we would fractionate out the make an extract of the mycelium, or the fruit body. We dig out the 2 fractions, and then we test each of them against tuberculosis. Whichever one tested stronger, then we knew going down the decision tree, let's follow that solvent sequence to see if we can find an acid constituent. We did this, we worked on it for about 7 years. After 7 years of bioguided fractionation, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, we found anti-tuberculosis compounds resident in Agarikon. Now, this is really important because these chlorinated coumarins turn out to be highly active against XDR, TB, and far more potent than the positive anti-tuberculosis controls. So the BioShield Biodefense Program, when we worked with them, we also did bioguided fractionation. And in the course of doing our research with the U.S. Defense Department, we found that Agarikon also had antiviral compounds, besides antibacterial compounds. Tuberculosis is a bacterium that is highly active against viruses, including smallpox. So you can Google my name, Stamets, smallpox, on National Public Radio. There's a vetted press release from the U.S. Defense Department that specifically states that of the several 100,000 samples that were analyzed, our samples were in the top 10 of all products analyzed. The mycelium, as it turns out, was active. The fruit bodies were not. The mycelium had far more antiviral effects than the fruit bodies. And that we were the only natural products out of more than 2 million samples submitted that had such significant activity. So we go around, we will go forest, we collect these, we get them into culture. We don't have to collect the mushrooms, we get a small piece of tissue and we grow it out. So working with the University of Mississippi, just like we did with Scott Franzlau and the Tuberculosis Research Center, we started doing fractionation. What is the active molecules against smallpox? And Gujao told me, we could have discovered that Agarikon was active against smallpox, but we didn't have time. We had no history of contact with smallpox until the Europeans introduced it. So we again did this bioguided fractionation 5 to 7 years later, and we found it. 2 active anti-smallpox molecules, sulfuric and ebutyric acid, over twice the activity of tenofovir, a positive drug control, and without the same toxicity. So now smallpox is not an emergent concern, hopefully. We've been immunized. The last case of smallpox infection was several decades ago, but clearly the concerns were flu viruses. So when the flu virus started to become really a pressing danger, the BioShield Biodefense Program said, "Oh, can we test your samples against flu viruses?" I said, "Great, we already have the samples, let's go ahead and test them." So we then sent samples, numbered, not identified, to the U.S. government, the BioShield Biodefense Program. Here's an example of some of the flu pandemics and the rate of mortality is phenomenally high with some of these, especially with H5N1. H7N9 is now emergent. H3N2 and flu B viruses is what's been going around recently. So there's a selectivity index. Anything that has 2 or more is active. Anything that has 10 or more is extremely active. This is a measure of testing for an antiviral drug. This is truly amazing. The U.S. government paid for 2,392 assays. I have a deep debt of gratitude, ironically, to George Bush and Dick Cheney. I never thought I would ever utter those words. So, the summary of these results of 2,392 samples, 4 of them turned out to be extraordinarily active against H3N2, against herpes simplex virus, H5N1, and compared to ribavirin. Selectivity index, anything over 10 is active. These are ribavirin's pretty good. It's got a selectivity index of 100. When you look at our extracts with 35% ethanol, these are human cells cultured in little wells. They had dilute our extracts 100 to 1. Now this becomes really important later on. So our extracts are diluted 100 to 1 with water to a 1% concentration in order to get rid of the alcohol, because the alcohol is toxic to the human cells. So 100 to 1 dilution of our extracts, our selectivity indexes, were stronger than a pure pharmaceutical drug. Again, the mycelium was active, the mushroom fruit bodies were not. So this resulted in a patent that was finally awarded in 2014. I filed this patent in 2004. There's no other evidence in scientific literature. Patents are awarded according to 3 criteria. 1, no prior evidence in the scientific literature or popular literature. 2, it has to be unobvious, especially people who speak against your invention. So I have a shout out to all my critics out there. I love you so much. The more you criticize me, the more you say it won't work, Stamets doesn't know what he's talking about. My personal question is, thank you. I can use that for my patents because I have expert teaching against my invention. It proves unobviousness. The third is usefulness. Benjamin Franklin could not have invented the cell phone because there's no cell towers or usefulness. So these are the 3 criteria. So, but the patent disappeared. 2004 I filed it. Normally it would show up on the patent homepage as applications by 2006. 2008 goes by, 2009, the patent is not there. I talked to my patent attorney, where is the application? It should be posted by now. We did it, we quizzed the patent office, and the U.S. Defense Department hijacked the patent because of national security, because of smallpox, and because of pandemic flu. So we had to give an intergovernmental agency trace, we pulled back the patent. After negotiating with the U.S. Defense Department, they finally said okay, and then the patent was issued. Now, that's great because 2 other articles came out in scientific literature talking about agarikon having antiviral properties, so it's good. Other people discovered 8, 10 years later, after I did, that agarikon is highly active against flu viruses and other viruses. So, all this was, okay, that's, we made these discoveries, that's interesting, etc. But then this article came out, and it blew me away. It turns out that Tamiflu, which is a very multi-billion-dollar drug, it is based on shikemic acid. Shikemic acid comes from the star anise plant, typically from Afghanistan and that region of the world. You can imagine the supply chain is difficult. This is why when there was a big flu threat a few years ago, Tamiflu disappeared because it's very difficult to get the feedstock, the star anise, because they're only harvested once a year. It turns out that blue light stimulates mycelium to make the precursor of Tamiflu, shikemic acid. We can make precursors for Tamiflu 24/7. by stimulating blue light under the mycelium. Phenomenal. So this now has resulted in spurring our research into antivirals, and I'll come back to this in just a second. Probably the most well-studied mushroom in the world is turkey tail. It's Stamets versicolor. It's called versicolor because it's variable in color. Turkey tails are well known throughout Asia for supporting the immune system. And we had an application for the National Institutes of Health, and I was a co-investigator, co-PI in writing the application. And we were awarded $2.2 million at the University of Minnesota Medical School and Mystere Medical College. But my co-authors said, well, Paul, we got this money, where should we get our mushrooms? And I said, oh, please, the chain of custody is so important. We have original test tubes, original cultures, we have an honorable chain of custody, get a bus. And they go, you can't be the supplier and a co-investigator, you have a conflict of interest. So I resigned as a co-investigator. They put us into a pool of other suppliers to see who would be chosen, who would be best. Thankfully, we were chosen. So what I'm going to show you now is, it's better for me to show this to you than read it repeated. But this became really important to me in 2009, when my 83-year-old mother called me up. She's a charismatic Christian. She hasn't seen a doctor since 1968. And she had rapidly developing metastasized breast cancer. So here is a 5-minute little video of her story. Another mushroom empowers the immune system, and this is turkey tail. This hit home to me very personally in June 2009, when my 84-year-old mother called me up and said, Paul, I have something very serious to talk to you about, but you're always so busy. It's a terrible thing to hear from Mom. I said, Mom, what's wrong? And she's a very happy, genuine person. She goes, I'm worried. And my mother's deeply religious and has not seen a doctor since 1968. She said, my right breast is 5 times the size of my left. I have 6 swollen lymph glands the size of walnuts. And her voice started shaking, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I started crying. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We spent a large part of June at the Swedish Breast Cancer Clinic in Seattle. The oncologist examined her, and upon second examination, she had a 5.5 centimeter diameter tumor. It metastasized. It went to her sternum. It went to her liver. She had stage 4 breast cancer. The doctor gave her less than 3 months to live and stated it was the second worst case of breast cancer she has seen as a doctor in 20 years of practice. We had a circle family meeting. Many of you have gone through this. My mom announced that she bought a pine casket, the cheapest one that she could find, because she was going to heaven. But then the doctor said, you know, you're too old to have radiation therapy, you can't have your breast removed. But there's an interesting study on turkey tail mushrooms at Mystere Medical School. You might want to try taking those. And that's my mother goes, well, my son's supplying those. So she was put on Taxol and Herceptin, wonderful drugs. And then she started taking 8 turkey tail capsules a day, 4 in the morning and 4 in the evening. And that was in June of 2009. And today, my mother has no detectable tumors. And I'd like to thank my mother. That was in 2009. I saw my mother yesterday. She's almost 93 years of age. After she passed the 5 years after 5 years, there was no detectable tumors. It's not quite called cure, but physicians, consider it to be a very good sign. And so when she got the news from her physician that she no longer had to be on treatment, she left me this message.
Hi, Mom. Everything's gone. Everything's wonderful. That's all with my colors. So thank you for the prayers. I love you.
mother as sharp as a tack. So the results of our clinical study are summarized here. There's a phase 1 study. Statistically significant increase in CD8 and T cells. The p-value, if you know about statistics, anything that's 0.05 or less is excellent. 0.01 is really good. This is 0.0003, and higher doses of turkey tail were associated with a more rapid recovery of lymphocytes and NK cell activity, oftentimes damaged by chemotherapy or radiation therapy, which my mother could not have radiation therapy or her breasts removed because of her age and the risk of infection. So this was published in a phase 1 clinical trial in a peer-reviewed oncological journal. And then a number of other articles came out that found that turkey tail combined with Herceptin makes the Herceptin work better. And then 2 interviews with the oncologist that was treating my mother, and also with me. And the oncologist told me, was interviewed and answered some questions that I did not even ask. She never suffered from camerabrain, the dulling, the fog from the use of chemotherapy, and she never had loss of appetite. These are 2 quite significant features that were associated with my mother. So there's a lot of interest in turkey tail, mushrooms, and polysaccharides. And there's a lot of misinformation that's been put out there. These polysaccharides are beta-glucans. They're large sugar molecules, and they activate an immune response based on an infection model. You have a fungal pathogen that you consume, your immune system response. It's an inflammatory response. But I want to show you the more sophisticated way of looking at this. This is the beta-glucan molecule, 3D. It is a huge scaffolding with a molecular weight of oftentimes thousands of kilodaltons. And this, when this articulates, this really makes a mushroom have a swarm. These are structural components, like the wood in the wooden house. Well, attached to the scaffolding of the beta-glucans are many other compounds, including proteins, polyphenols, and lipids in particular. And when you use different solvents, you can break these other polyphenols and proteins and lipids away from the beta-glucan scaffolding. These are huge macromolecules. They have all sorts of end branches. They then have embedded with them all sorts of other constituents. But you can remove them. And very interestingly, an article came out using lipases that took the lipids away from the beta-glucans. And when they took the lipids away from the beta-glucans, it decreased the immune response or value of PSK, in this case, by more than 83%. Showing that the beta-glucans, yes, they're good. Yes, they alert the immune system, cause a TLR2 response, but without those lipids, then the immune response is not as great. So that's really, really interesting to me, because in particular the polyphenols and these lipids. So I worked again with the National Institutes of Health Virology Department, and it's a kind of a complex story, but I'm going to show you our recent results this past year with NIH Virology. And we found that these polyphenols that are associated again with the beta-glucans, when we separated them, we found 5 polyphenols highly active against the human papillomavirus, HPV. 45% of men have, 75% of women. These are oncoviruses, oftentimes they're leading to cervical cancer, esophageal cancer. And this is the actual, if you follow my cursor here, this is directly from NIH, National Institutes of Health, highly active. These 5 polyphenols that were embedded in the scaffolding of the beta-glucans were extraordinarily active against HPV viruses. So this is something that I just kind of stumbled into. I'm really honored and excited that this past month, the U.S. Patent Office has now granted me my first patent on molecules against HPV. And so this is also resident within these extracts. Now, the take-home message here is the mycelium offers you a deep well of immunoactive substances, antiviral substances, antibacterial substances. You can fractionate down to one constituent, but you can also fractionate away from the complexity of the immunological benefits that it gives you as a whole. So, we are complex organisms that benefit from the complexity of nature. So, I want to now full circle back to the bee shaman, which I had mentioned before. And the use of honey to preserve magic mushrooms, we discussed. But many of you may not fully appreciate the benefit that bees give to our global food supply. Biosecurity in the world now is in imminent danger of the loss of honeybees. There's about 81 billion beehives in the world, China being number one, Turkey, the US, Iran, and Argentina. And the loss of bees is a direct threat to food biosecurity that is increasingly a problem. So when a friend of mine, Louis Schwartzberg, a filmmaker, came to me and knew of my other research with insects and against viruses, he said, "Paul, what can you do to help the bees?" And so I started focusing my attention on bees. Now, this is the bees flying to pollinate tomato plants. And one bee can visit 1,000 flowers a day. And the absence of bees now in the landscape is due to a confluence of factors. When you see bees on flowers, the last days of their lives, bee flight for pollination used to be on an average of 9 days, and now it's 5. So there's been a shrinking of about half. Now here is your food supply benefiting from bees. If we don't have bees, this is what your dairy supply looks like. Bees pollinate hay, alfalfa, and clover. Well, a presidential memorandum came out from President Obama specifying some of the stressors that are causing bees to die. Poor nutrition, lack of poison, mice, viruses, neonicotinoids. But this chart really brings it home. Here in the United States, this is the loss of the annual bee die-off this past year. 72% in Oklahoma, 74% in Maryland. And you look at the national average, it goes up and down, depending on the regions. There is neonicotinoid drift coming from corn farms, etc. They're impacting the immune system. And so the neonicotinoids are having a disastrous effect on the bees. And the bees that are associated with planted corn in particular. The use of neonicotinoids is skyrocketing in agriculture comparatively in the past 20 years. And the neonicotinoids are increasing the sperm vitality of the male and drone bees. Also, glyphosates, which are very much promoted by Bayer and other big companies like Monsanto, interfere with the cytochrome P450 pathway. This is something that all animals use. You use the cytochrome P450 pathway to detoxify compounds, and when you interfere with that pathway, you have a hyperaccumulation of these toxic compounds. So when I'm studying this problem with the bees and looking at it and thinking about it, an article came out in PNAS, is an open source journal, that found that the honey that was in the beehives that have been abandoned. Now, for those of you who don't know about beekeeping, when these bees disappear, it's not like there's lots of dead bees around the hive. You go out on a Monday, you check your hives, everything's fine. You go out on Thursday, they're all gone. There may be a few dead bees, but 30 to 50,000 bees have left, and they don't come back. Well, it turns out when they analyze the honey in those abandoned beehives, it lacked p-cumaric acid. Now, p-cumaric acid comes from the delignification of wood. It's also in lots of grains. But in the absence of that, the bees cannot detoxify. So that is one of these symptoms of what is putting a stress on the bee population. But by far, the biggest stress is the deformed wing virus. The deformed wing virus now is a pandemic that spread across the world. It came from Asia. It is now virtually all bees in the world are infected with a slew of viruses, including the deformed wing virus. In 2016, there's a number of articles talking about its prevalence. Covert infections of the deformed wing virus causes the bees' wings to have less strength, and so they're not able to forage as long, and they end up not being able to come back to the nest. And the introduction of varroa mice in particular has spread the deformed wing virus. The varroa mice are like, they bite the bees, are like a dirty syringe. It is now considered to be the leading contender of colony collapse disorder vectored by the varroa mite. The varroa mite is being controlled by a miticide called Amitraz. Amitraz is used for killing ticks on cattle. It's approved in the United States specifically to control ticks. It has been used off-label by beekeepers to control the varroa mite. 5 years ago, 2 drenches of amitraz in a beehive per season was typical, and now beekeepers are drenching their hives 7 or 8 times because the mites are developing resistance. And so 100% of the honeybees now worldwide have been infected with the deep-worm wing virus. The bee collapse is happening. It's what they call a bee apocalypse, because of the rampant spread of this. And so I was confronted with all this history that you've heard. And I was laying in bed in the waking state, between being fully asleep and waking up. I've discovered in this state of dreaming, that is a perfect time to come up with solutions. And I had an epiphany. My epiphany progresses through the following experiences. I was growing the garden giant mushroom, 1984. I put the garden giant mushroom up in my garden. I had 2 beehives. I come out in July. I look very closely, and I see bees have moved the wood chips to expose the mycelium. The bees, I look closely, they're sipping on the little exudates and exosomal metabolites coming from mycelium. And for 40 days, with a continuous convoy of bees going from my garden giant patch back to my beehive, I kept a diary on this. There are other flowers that were in the area, around the garden. The bees were preferentially going to my garden giant patch. It sucked the mycelium, so the patch shrunk to about 1/3 of its depth over 40 days. I published this in 1988 in Harris Smith Magazine, in 1993 one of my books, and thereupon I forgot it. Now, this next slide is a little bit complicated, but as the mycelium grows, it produces enzymes, and the mycelium stops growing and exposed to light. Enzymes are stopped being produced, and p-chimeric acid stops being produced. It struck me that, in retrospect, I think the bees were uncovering the mycelium that was in the dark in order to get access not only to the sugars, but also the p-chimeric acid that would activate their detoxification pathways. Somewhat speculative, okay? So that's one event that I had, 1983, 1984. I walk through the old growth forest. I see bear scratch trees, bear scratches. The bear scratch trees, resin comes out. Bees are attracting the resin or getting propolis that the bees use to patch their hives. So I'm walking through the old growth forest in the South Fork of Hope, the Libby Peninsula. Go around the corner, my wife and I see this big bear scratch. Bam! Scratched. And it was oozing out this resin. I'm like, wow. I told my wife, bear scratch trees in the state of Washington harvested the timber under the schools. And my neighbor killed 400 bears under contract by the government because the school systems ones were being threatened by bear scratches because when the bear scratch the trees, polypore mushrooms grow out of the trees and kills the tree. So humans are so adept at choosing the wrong, addressing issues of nature. So I went back 2 years later, orienteered to the Olympic National Forest, no trails. After 4 hours, we found the tree. And there's the bear scratch. And lo and behold, the red belted polypore had popped out of the wound. So I started doing these experiments and growing up the mycelium. And I contacted Washington State University saying, I think I have an idea here because of our antiviral research with the BioShield Biodefense Program about how to help the bees. And I asked the researcher there just to bear with me. And so I laid out my hypothesis, and he said, don't go anywhere else. We want to work with you. So we started growing up mycelium, and we made micro honey. This is mycelium that's grown on rice. And we make this really sugar-rich syrup. And it's delicious. And then we fed this to bees at the Washington State University. 4 replicates, 100 bees in a cage, and we feed them a 1%, a 0.1%, and 10% sugar solution. Ganoderma appellatum is one of the ones that you see right here. And what the beekeepers do is they feed sugar water to the bees. So our idea is we put these extracts in the sugar water to feed the bees to see if it would have an effect. So we did this research at Washington State University. We surveyed about 20 different species, specifically looking at longevity and antiviral properties. And the red-belted polite boar, the one that's introduced by bears scratching the trees, the amadou, which my hat is made of, the red reishi, which is highly active in the BioShield program, also against flu viruses, chaga, which is also very active against flu viruses in the BioShield program. All of these stood out as being prime candidates. With the red-belted polite boar amadou, it literally doubled the lifespan of bees. Bees live to an average of about 30 days. And at the time that they're foraging, after about a week, then that time is the most important time for bringing pollen back to the nest. And a number of bees that were surviving, statistically significant, showing a nearly doubling of the bees. And Dr. Steve Shepard says, an entomologist, 39 years studying bees, I'm unaware of any reports that have helped extend the life of bees more than this. So we started doing other experiments. And then we conducted experiments with 532 beehives in the almond orchards of California, the largest bee study in history. So I'm going to show you now a short little clip on some of those experiments we did with Washington State University and the bees in the almond orchards.
Shepard. I'm a professor of entomology here at Washington State University in the Department of Entomology. And I work on honeybee genetics and evolution. Honeybees are by far the most important pollinators for agriculture. Approximately a third of the crops grown rely on cross-pollination to thrive.
I don't think bees are properly recognized for the economic benefit that they give to society. I think increasingly it will be recognized as bees become more scarce and food prices climb. But here with these beautiful almond orchards, one of the most bee-dependent crops in the world. And the almond industry knows in particular that without honeybees, crops are greatly hindered. So there's many fruits and berries and nuts that are dependent upon bee pollination.
Over the last decade, honeybee populations worldwide have declined drastically. Beekeepers and scientists have been working to try to find out what's the cause of this decline. One of the leading problems facing beekeepers today is the varroa mite. These mites attach themselves to bees, feed on their blood, feed on the larvae, and transmit viruses.
Varroa mites are very good at developing resistance to chemical treatments. The beekeeping industry had a couple of compounds that they used pretty extensively originally, and it's really just a matter of time before mites develop resistance to that compound.
Right here is a sick bee. You can see her wings are deformed. This is a symptom of varroa and the virus called deformed wing virus.
This colony is not going to make it, so even though there are bees here now, this has been destroyed by varroa. There's all these dead larvae in here that will never become adult bees and never contribute.
There's a tremendous need to develop methods to control varroa mites that are sustainable and don't rely on the use of chemicals, allowing beekeepers to get off of a chemical treadmill. I became aware a couple of years ago of some work by fungi at that time called Stamets. They had some fungal extracts and mushroom extracts that had antiviral properties, so the idea then became to use mushroom extracts to attempt to control the virus titers.
The extracts we're using are coming from the living tissue of this mushroom when it was alive, called the mycelium. And now we're seeing that these mushrooms actually extend the longevity in bees.
Honeybees are critical to agriculture. They pollinate more than 110 varieties of crops. This orchard that we're standing in is 800 to 1,000 acres, and every single one of those blossoms need to be fertilized in a timely manner all at once.
This research experiment that we're doing, I think it's the largest beehive experiment ever conducted in the world. 532 beehives testing the effects of these extracts and helping bees survive.
So what we're doing is we are sampling these beehives to check virus levels, and then we're also treating them with mushroom extracts, which is what we're testing.
So one of the beauties of the fungal extract for controlling the viruses in honeybees is the ease of use for commercial beekeepers. They're used to handling products like this as far as mixing something into their sugar syrup and feeding it to bees. It's very simple to adopt.
My hope is that this research will give us a very important tool in our biological toolkit to help save biodiversity and the ecosystems of this planet. If our ecosystems fail, what do people do for food? And this is fundamental to saving our ecosystems. So I'm hoping that people will recognize mushrooms for the important roles they play in the ecosystem, of which we're just now beginning to discover before it's too late.
So we conducted these experiments with thousands of hours of research. So I'm going to show you now the conclusion of this research. On Tuesday, we submit our paper to Science. This is the crowning achievement of my life. If anything, will go down in history. I think this could be the most significant. So the mice transfer lots of viruses. All queen bees now, unfortunately, have the black queen cell virus. The mycelial extracts, not the mushrooms, the mycelial extracts reduce the black queen cell virus in 7 days, 500 to 1, greater than 500 to 1, reishi and chaga. The very two same species that reduce viruses that affect birds, pigs, and people. Think about it. The antiviral effects of Amadou mushroom against the deformed wind virus. Amadou reduces it greater than 800 to 1. The p-value of significance is fantastic, but even more fantastic is reishi against the deformed wind virus. The p-value of significance is 0.00001. Anyone who knows about statistics, this is an extraordinarily convincing data. The most extraordinary result, however, was against the Lake Sinai virus, reducing with reishi extracts the mycelium, not the fruit bodies, reduces Lake Sinai virus more than 45,000 to 1, with a p-value significance of 0.00005. There are no reports of anything that produces bee viruses until our discovery. This is amazing because also it's orally active. It goes past through digestion, past the microbiome with all the bacteria in your gut, past the acids and the enzymes, past the cytochrome P450 pathway, entering into the bloodstream of the bees, doubling their lifespan, and significantly reducing a multitude of problematic viruses. Bees are the second most well-studied animal in the world. We're number 1, bees are number 2. This is an animal clinical study. We all grew up with Winnie the Pooh. We all knew that bears go to bees that nest in trees with hollows. But astonishingly, there are no reports in the scientific or popular literature
of bees being attracted to mycelium because of immunological benefit or antiviral benefit. The extracellular metabolites from the mycelium, again, not the mushrooms. The mycelium is the immune system of the mushroom. Benefits the bees by bolstering immunity, reducing viruses, strengthening wing lifespan, increasing stamina for foraging, providing sugars, vitamin Bs, and lipids, helping fight fungal and bacterial infections, providing p-kerameric acid for activating the cytokine P50 pathway, supports the microbiome. These mushrooms are prebiotics that help the beneficial bacteria, and then reducing the toxicity of pollutants. Astonishingly, I file patents. I file patents because this is a lot of work, folks. You build a house, you get credit for building your house. I built this intellectual property, I get credit for it, but I plan to open source it, ultimately for the entire world. If I would not patent this and made it open source now, Monsanto and other companies would use it for greenwashing. It's important to commercialize it in order to create the revenue stream that profits to be able to benefit the commons. So the patents now have been issued yesterday. The European Patent Office issued for like 20, 25 countries. It's been issued in the United States, Australia, Europe, soon to Canada, New Zealand, and Eurasia. This is a phenomenal discovery. Our fellow researchers are giving talks at bee conferences. We are joining the mushroom community and the bee community together. When I first presented this data 3 years ago, when we only had 10-to-1 reductions of viruses, we've now optimized the formula. I gave a shout out to 900 bee scientists and professional beekeepers in the audience. Has anyone here ever heard or seen or written that mushroom extracts will reduce viruses in bees? Please stand up now and tell me. There's a pregnant silence. The US Patent Office, the European Patent Office, WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Agency, have done massive searches in Chinese, German, English, French, every language. And no one has discovered this until now but me. For about 3 seconds, honestly, about 3 seconds, I got really excited. Like, oh my God, Stamets, you discovered something that's paradigm shifting. And then I got horribly depressed. I got hiding in plain friggin' sight, dude. We are Neanderthals with nuclear weapons. We are ignoring nature. So independent of whether a scientist discovers an antiviral molecule, or independent of a scientist or a medical doctor or physician determining that you have an illness due to a disease caused by a microbe, or if you're a shaman who say you have a disease because of a spirit, the common bridge between those two is that diseases can be caused by something in the unseen world. This is full circle to First Nations and First Peoples' belief in the spiritual and medicinal value of nature. Nature is a numbers game. A multiplicity of variables on one side of the equation leads to success or failure on the other side. The complexity of the factors that confound us today are seemingly insurmountable, but I don't think so. We need to reinvest into the deep well of knowledge of nature. There are literally solutions all around us, hiding in plain sight. We submit our article to Science on Tuesday. This is a high-impact journal. This is something that is scalable. It is ecologically rational. It is through the concerted effort of a great team of people. It can use native species anywhere in the world where there are forests. We can amplify these species using indigenous specimens. The reishi strain that we used came from Quebec. This is something that is teachable.
It's super inexpensive. And I think it opens up even something more important. I mentioned to you that the amadou mushroom was the first mushroom ever to be discovered to have antiviral properties against the tobacco mosaic virus. We now know there's another vector that's spreading the deformed wing virus. It's pollen, without the mites. Nature is interconnected. This affords us the opportunity of being able to mitigate diseases in plants and animals. We can lower the viral burden and the vectors that transmit these viruses throughout nature. So in our partnership with Washington State University, we have now contributed over $150,000, my wife and I, and through a lot of you who have supported Telegraphs and my company. This money is going back. I have to say this, folks, just because it's so important. Yesterday is the first day of my life I became debt-free. I paid off my no debt. I have no partners. So my wife and I have no partners. I created this company because I was a little boy in the laboratory of my parents' basement with my brother John, and I always dreamed of being a scientist. I'm living my dream. I don't have to worry about being fired from the university because I talked about the Stone 8 hypothesis. I don't worry about the fact that I trip on psilocybin once a year. But this opens up the possibilities. Do not be defeated by the depression of the news, of our society, in the short term, preoccupation with social media and their devices. The trolls, they're so vicious. These people hide behind anonymity. They don't have the guts to stand up and be held accounted for. And they get so much attention. Really, folks, it's our time to take back our future. We can take back our future by respecting nature. And indigenous peoples knew it so well, or know it so well. The concept of 7 generations. Thinking about your impact that you have today on the impact of the generations in the future. You make all the money you want in the world and you can't take it with you. What is the heritage that you will leave? I hope of my life in discovering these keys to new doors will be opportunities for future generations to walk through, to make discoveries that will help us overcome 6X. The solutions are economically scalable, easy to deploy, ecologically rational, and can be immediately implemented, except it's not legal. Bees are considered livestock. In the United States, we cannot make antiviral claims. In Canada, you can, with nutraceuticals. We have to hire lobbyists to go to Washington, D.C., and I have to spend several $100,000 to convince the USDA to give an exemption. Now, thankfully, 2 of our co-authors are USDA virologists, Dr. Jay Evans. He's one of the co-authors, the premier bee virologist, I need a beer. Bee virologist with the USDA, he's one of our co-authors, along with Don Lopez. So we have the WSU, we have the USDA as co-authors, and so we're going to do a petition for an emergency exemption in order to take this to market. We need to reframe our concept of decomposition. We need to celebrate it. We need to let it rot. We're all going to rot. Get used to it. Woo! You're going to merge back into the leather mycelium from which we evolved. We're stardust. They're glommed together in this short lifespan. As an assembly, a guild of molecules and microorganisms that exist in symbiosis, but will scatter back into the heavens. I believe matter becomes life. Life becomes single cells become strings. Linearly they form, membranes form. And we all exist in the fabric of nature throughout the cosmos. Microdiversity is biosecurity. Humans, trees, bears, mushrooms, the birds, the bees, all terrestrial organisms evolved to be interconnected with the mycelial web of life. Think of the implications. The same mycelium. We were forest people for millions of years. We started cutting down the forest, we started getting away from our origins, our roots, literally. The same fungi that helps the bees. They produce viruses, birds, pigs, humans, plants. We can engage these mycelial solutions to create a paradigm shift in nature that strengthens nature, not in opposition, but in support of it, in collaboration, in community. So I invite you all together to recognize we will live together, all of us. Our molecules will mix together within the micromolecular matrix of the universe. Why not? I want to thank you all very much.
Goes on.